Hi, I'm Sherri Sulkowski, and this is Knit On. It's the first show of our 4th season, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today because there's so much to talk about. We're going to start off with what we now call Knit News. As some of you remember from last year, I teach a great deal, and I teach a children's class over at South Fayette called Little Lions Academy. And last year, the girls there started what they called Knit News, and I adopted that here. And there's a lot new going on. First of all, my class there, I had 8 this year, so we have 8 new knitters out in the world creating things and being very excited about knitting. And there's certainly a lot to be excited about right now. So that's what we're going to start off with today, is what's new with knitting. So many people have been asking me recently, mostly non-knitters, you know, what's going on with knitting? Has that sort of become passé? I think they see less of the some of the novelties and some of the quick projects and some of the things that we thought of 4 or 5 years ago when knitting really became this big boom. And so they're thinking that maybe knitting isn't quite as hot as it had been, and my answer to that is no. And I think the evidence of that is that there are still new products coming out, there are still new events geared toward knitters and knitting related markets and that sort of thing. And so I wanted to bring some of those things to you today so that you can become aware of them as well. Even with as much as I do with knitting, it's hard to stay on top of everything that's new as far as knitting is concerned. First of all, some bad news, which I don't like to usually bring you, but there is a knit shop that's closing, and that would be the one that is in Canonsburg, and the name of it is The Knit Shop. So if you're looking for some bargains, that might be something that's available to you there, as they are closing out their inventory. But there are certainly always new places that are becoming available, new websites, new shops, new products, and those are the things that we're going to be bringing to you this morning as well. I'm not a great one for gadgets, but every once in a while something will catch my eye in the knitting magazines, and I wanted to bring one of those to you today because I know a lot of us sort of battle with keeping yarn clean and keeping it contained, and you know, as you're knitting you need a way to sort of house your knitting. And at one point we were talking about actually just putting your yarn in a bowl and sitting it on the floor and letting it unwind naturally as you were working on it. That sometimes isn't feasible because if you have a pet or a small child, they can still, of course, get into that bowl and get your fiber. There's a new product out. I'm going to point to it since we have several things on the page, but if you can see it, I'm going to try to tip so we don't have any glare. And this is called a Carolina yarn bell, and it's sort of shaped like a bell, but of course doesn't have any sound to it. I'm not doing very well with this today, I'm sorry. It's a ceramic bell. You put your yarn underneath it, and it has a hole in the top of it, and your yarn feeds out through that, and then you can knit from it. So your yarn is actually contained on a table or what have you next to you, and then is not, the cat isn't chasing it across the room or whatever. And I thought that was a really clever little ceramic invention that someone came up with and is marketing that. As with everything that we're doing on the show today, if you need any of the information, just email me. My email address is sherrisulkowski@yahoo.com. We have so many things that would be graphics today on the show. I didn't want to overwhelm you with all of those. So what you can do, as with anything that we do on the show, if you need the websites or the places to get these things, just email me and I'll get those all out to you. A couple of new websites that I had visited recently and I thought they were really great and I wanted you to be aware of them are knitspot.com, which happens to be a blog that a knitter has, but she has some really, really beautiful patterns. And as we knit longer, we sort of are looking for that next new thing to do, the next technique to work with, something to keep things a little more exciting, especially as we are seeing less and less of the novelty yarns being out there, which were just, they did all of the work and created the effect on their own. What we're seeing now is a return to classic fibers wools, cashmeres, cottons, those kinds of things, as well as the newer ones like bamboo and soy. But those yarns are going to require sometimes a little more technique put in to them in order to make them sort of fresh and appealing. So some of the patterns that she has available have a great deal of technique for you, laces, cables, those kinds of things that you're probably wanting to get into if you've been into knitting for a while now. And that's the way that I find it's best to keep things fresh and sort of exciting for yourself, is to always be doing some new techniques. Another website, and as I said, you can get all of these if you email me, is called Knitter's Review. And it's really great in that they review all kinds of knitting products. If you get on there, you can review books, yarns, needles, get some comments from people who have actually used those products and find out what they felt were true to be about that product. For instance, I looked up a yarn that we were stocking at a yarn store that I worked at a few years back, and we found that we didn't really like it because it shed a great deal, it had some problems with it, and it was a rather expensive yarn. So we decided to not stock that that we felt that we were seeing with it, and we didn't want our customers disappointed with it. And so that was a name that I recognized pretty quickly. And they were saying the exact same things that we were seeing. If you were shopping online or at a shop where you didn't have someone helping you, those are things that you wouldn't know about that yarn. You would invest in that, spend your time knitting it, and then be very disappointed with it when the angora in that fiber is, you know, literally everywhere as you're knitting it and as you're wearing it and as you're laundering it, and becoming a problem. So those are things that you can all find at knittersreview.com. Again, you can get that information from me if you choose to email me. I'll give you all the websites that we have today. A lot of what's new in knitting, I'm finding, or maybe it's just because what I gravitate to, is that there's a lot new in knitting socks. And those of us who have been knitting socks for a long time have become somewhat addicted to them and enjoy having people around us who are also addicted to them. But there are so many products and things coming out as far as sock knitting that it's always really fresh. Something that has come out that is just, I think, really incredibly smart. I'm not sure why no one ever thought of it before, but now that it's here, who cares? It's here and we can have access to it. And it is, you buy it, it's dyed, and you literally unravel it. I'm trying to hold it. It's right here, and you can see the graphics for this go all the way down, and here is the finished sock. It is machine knitted, 2 strands of sock yarn together, then you unravel it, knit 2 socks at one time, and of course then what that alleviates is that your socks become exactly alike so that you don't have to worry about the spacing on where things are dyed in your yarn, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. This is available through it's put out by Plymouth. There's also a product very similar put out by Knit Picks, which is an ivory product, and then you can dye it yourself. So if you enjoy dyeing things yourself, there's that product as well. Once again, all that information is available if you email me. And what we find sometimes when we're doing socks that are striped or have these dyed effects in them is that some match up. If you're buying yarns, sometimes they're hard to match that are dyed and manufactured so that each ball is a sock. Sometimes what happens is, in order to get the socks to match exactly, you're going to have to do some playing around with that yarn, and I can show you what I mean by that with this finished pair. This is a self-striping yarn put out by Knit Picks. I love it, really soft, fabulous yarn. But what I found was when I went to cast on, I was having a problem getting it to be the same part of the colorway so that my stripes were coming out the same. Some people don't fuss with that. They don't mind that they're slightly different, that the stripes are placed differently on the sock. I tend to fuss a little bit with those kinds of things. So I wanted them to be the same. And by the time I pulled out enough to get the ball to be exactly the same so that I could cast on and have it be the same, this is the yarn that I needed to pull out in order to get to the same place in the ball. So while it's not wasted, I could always use it for something else. It was a little bit of my time lost in order to get that started in the right way. If you have some of these on hand and you're looking for a quick way to get them started in the same way. I started a pair last night, and I happened to have one of those light bulb moments that sometimes take, 30 plus years of knitting in order to have that light bulb go on. But I was getting ready to start another pair. Now this one, it is probably not as imperative that I start them in the same place because it isn't actually a stripe. But I did figure out a way to get it to start in the same place. This one, as you can see, kind of does a more spiraled effect going vertically as opposed to a horizontal. But what I did was I took both balls and I pulled them out and I fussed with it before I ever cast on for the first sock. And I got them placed so that they were the same. And what I did with the second one was that I went ahead and I did my slip knot, which, as you know, is the first stitch. I put that exactly in the same place as I had my slip knot on the first ball, so that when I go to is always our first. Cast on, I know exactly where that was on the first ball, and they will match exactly. And as I said, that would be more important if we were working with a self-striping. So I just ran those down the length of my dining room table, which I happen to have a white tablecloth on, so it made the colors very easy to see. You could do it on your bed, on carpeting, someplace that it's easy for you to really stretch that yarn out a very long length, because some of these colorways are going to be yards long by the time you have something that's long enough for a stripe to be knitted that would be, a half an inch or an inch long. Your yards into your yarn. Stretch that out as far as you can. Move that so that you can see that both of those strands are dyed the same way. Put both of your slip knots in at the same time. Go ahead, cast on your first sock and knit it, and then you have the second one ready to go. So I just very gently wound that back up on my ball, but left that slip knot where I needed it to be. So that's a tip if you are using some of those self-stripings and you like your socks to be the same as I do. Some of the other things that are coming up with sock knitting, one that I thought was really exciting because I happen to love Stephanie Pearl McPhee, and I've mentioned her a number of times here on the show, and she's a knitting humorist, and she's got some great books out there that you might want to read. But she is putting together what she is calling a sock summit. And it's 3 days of classes, the beginning of August of 09. She's got some great teachers coming in. She's got a yarn market coming in. And it's all about knitting socks. Socks and nothing but socks. And 30 years ago when I started, we couldn't have ever found such a thing as 3 days of just sock knitting. So I think that's pretty exciting. She's going to be putting that together. She blogs. I can give you her blog site if you get in touch. And her blog on September 23rd has the details for that. Come on back in the second segment. I have a little more to say about socks, and then I've got a great technique for you. I'm Sherri Sulkowski, and this is Knit On.
This is a tree that was never chopped down to make a crutch that was never needed. By a child who never got polio. Because vaccine was never in short supply. Thanks to people whose compassion wasn't either. Over the years, Rotary Club members have helped immunize over 2 billion children against polio. Soon, the world will be polio-free. Rotary, humanity in motion.
Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps.
Like all new parents, my husband and I want what's best for our baby. When it came to immunizations, I wanted the facts. So I carefully researched vaccines. Vaccines like those against measles and influenza are not only a good idea, they could save our daughter's life. Take the time to get the facts. Vaccines save lives.
Welcome back to Knit On. We've got a little more to discuss with socks, and then we're going to move on to a really great technique today, so I hope that you'll stay with me. I happened to notice a brand new magazine that I got, and one of the full page ads happened to be all socks, and I thought that, you know, the Socks in the City, obviously a takeoff on that, you know, really great summer movie. While being humorous, really cute socks as well. But here again, a new product coming out and a company, you know, with enough advertising dollars to do a full page ad in a national magazine. So obviously, socks really are where it's happening as far as knitters are concerned. And a lot of people say to me, even knitters ask me, you know, why would you knit socks? You know, they're on small needles, and, you know, there's a lot of reasons that some people seem to think that knitting socks is not the way to go, and obviously I disagree with them on that. But I happen to have my 10 top reasons for why you could knit socks, or why you should knit socks, or why socks are enjoyable. First of all, they're unisex, and when you're making gifts, sometimes making gifts for guys is a little harder to do. If you do other things like beading or cross stitch or whatever, you're going to find it a little more difficult to do a gift for a guy, as opposed to if you knit, who doesn't knit socks? Or excuse me, who doesn't wear socks? And they're also ageless, and that's number 2. You can knit them for babies through adults. You can knit them all the way up to, you know, your great-grandmother if you really wanted to. They're portable, and I find that to be a great reason to also knit them in the summer, because, you know, we're moving around a lot and going to the kids' games and those sorts of things. So they're really great when you're traveling, when you're doing a lot, when you're going to the doctor's office and know that you're going to have to sit there for a while. They're portable. They're also affordable because they're smaller, although when we get into the hand-dyed, sometimes those are a little pricier, but you really can do a cost-effective product as far as what you're making. It's generally less expensive to do than, say, sweaters or Afghans or what have you. Number 5 is that there's a choice of methods. You really can customize the way you like to knit those socks. You can start at the toe and go to the cuff, or the opposite, from the cuff to the toe. You can do them on 4 needles. You can do them on 2 circular needles. You can do them on 1 long circular needle, which is something that we're probably going to be doing later in this season, our 4th, here on Knit On. There are some of the most fabulous yarns out there, and like I said, showed you a couple of things today, really incredible things. In fact, Knit Picks just put out a new one. I know they blew it out. They are on wait list only with their newest sock yarn. So those are always going very quickly, and there's always some great choices out there as far as that goes. And socks can be, number 7, is that they can be as simple or as complex as you want them to be. The ones that I held up here on the set today using a self-dyed yarn that, you know, basically does all the work for me. I just did a simple sockinette. Didn't even do any ribbing at the top. I just let that roll at the top. Probably the simplest sock that you can make. And you can, of course, go with lace and cables and all sorts of things, color work, and really get into a lot of technique with them as well. Number 8 is that they don't have as many fit problems as you would think of with a sweater or a vest or some of the other things that we might wear. They're a pretty basic garment, pretty basic shaping, so you have a lot less fit problems with making those. I think of them as being a little bit of magic too, which is number 9 on my list. When those are hanging off of the needles, no matter which direction you're going with them, toe to cuff or the opposite, it is actually hanging there looking like a sock. And people really are amazed by that you've got literally a sock on knitting needles and that you're making that. And number 10 is that I think it's a great way to start doing some of your own designing, because it is a very simple garment knitted in the round that you can really sort of customize that and sort of venture out a little bit and do some design work of your own and think of some things that might work within the context of knitting socks. So for today, that's what we have on socks. Hopefully I'll get you hooked on them, if not today, sometime this 4th season. The technique that we have today has to do with ribbing. And a lot of times we think of ribbing as being kind of tedious. It's usually what you start with on a sweater because it's at the bottom edge and, you know, it's knit 2, purl 2 or whatever ribbing you're putting in. And a lot of knitters don't really like to do ribbing. It does have certain advantages to it though. It's sort of self edges, you know, it has a sort of a finished look to it. It does even going vertically, it has a finished look to it so that you don't have to do something else to finish the edge of it. It has a great deal of shaping just in the properties of ribbing so that you don't have to do a lot of shaping in order to make something fit the body. You can really just sort of do a knitted ribbed tube and it's going to fit the contours of a body pretty well just because of the elasticity that it creates in the ribbing process. One of the things that a lot of knitters will find is that knitting has a problem, which has sometimes been discussed, and some ideas have been tossed around about how best to alleviate those. I have tried some of the ones that have been suggested over the years, you know, knitting into the back of the stitch on the last knit of the rib. And let me show you what I mean by that. This is some ribbed fabric, and this is a ribbed vest that I'm developing for a class that I'll be teaching later this fall, and that's another thing that you can get some information from me about. But a lot of times what we will find, and this one has been knitted continental, which I'm going to show you, so you're not going to see it in this particular one, but a lot of times what you're going to see is that that last knit, when it's in next to that purl, goes a little wider and a little looser for some reason, and we can try to explore, you know, what's going on with that and, you know, drive ourselves crazy trying to alleviate it. Some people will just leave it. They figure a hand knit should look a little less perfect than, say, a machine knit should. Some people fuss about it. I sometimes think the longer we knit, we get a little pickier about our knitting. But what I tried with this project, and what I'm going to show you how to do today, is to use continental method knitting in order to alleviate that. Now this one, the yarn is a little bit of a thick and thin, so you don't see it quite as much as you will see on the plain wool that I'm going to demonstrate with. This is just a knit vest, and there again, as I said, some of the shaping is very simple, but it does fit the body really well because it is all knitted in ribbing. It has a big collar on the back that has some cabling in it, but the body of it, where it needs to fit, is all in rib. So let's set this up and I'll show you what I mean by doing continental. We've done continental here on the show a couple of times when we've been doing some color work, and I've told you that that's just about the only way that I do any color work is to do continental. I'm going to set this up on my hands the way I like to do it, and this is something that you could mimic and then sort of customize for your own needs. With the my hands on the needles just the way I normally would hold them, I just put the working yarn over my left index finger so that it's sitting right behind the stitch that I am about to do. And a knitted stitch is as simple as reaching that right hand needle back and picking up that yarn that is on my index finger. So that, now this one should be purled, but I'm going to do a couple more for you just to show you that knitted stitch. So there's really sort of an economy of motion there in that my hands are not leaving the needles. There's not a tremendous amount of motion to that. It's more of a feel almost. But I think the camera, even for as little motion as there is, you can see, I'll tip just a little bit so you can see I'm just reaching back and pulling that toward me. I'll do one more until we get over to where we need to purl. Now for the longest time I had a hard time purling with this, but if you don't overthink it, I just let that yarn come toward me as we need it to be for a purl. You can see now it's in front of my needle, and I put my needle in as though I'm going to purl, and I come up over that yarn and pull it back. I come up through the stitch, over the yarn, and pull it back. I'll do a couple more for you, even though it's going to throw us out of sequence on this rib. Up and over and back. And I'm just letting that yarn that is on my, it's still on my finger, but I'm just letting it rest in front of the needle. And some been doing things a certain way for a long time, switching, you know, you think to yourself, now why am I bothering myself with this? But, you know, there's really nothing wrong with learning something new. Okay, so here we go back to knit. Sometimes, you know, if you... Now the one thing that this is going to do is that it's going to put your knitted stitches sitting opposite on the needle. So I am going to need to go into the back of that stitch when I do my knits. But I will show you, just hold on to this a second. What that does is really a very nice even, and I did a 2 by 2 so that you just have 1 and 1 sitting next to each other so that you can see that that is really, look on those 2 knitted stitches. One of them is not looser than the other. And as I said, that's something that you sometimes get when you're working in American fashion where we do what is called throwing a very even yarn. Let me do this for you again. We're back over to a purl. I just reach back in and over the yarn, and pull forward. Let me do those 2 knits. And when we do the return, I will show you that in order to keep those straight, you will need to knit into the back of the stitch. See, here it is. It needs to be knitted into the back. And that's something that a little muscle memory is going to help you with. You'll get used to doing that. So if you're having trouble with your ribbing, I recommend this. For me, it works really well. Whether you're doing just ribbing on an edging or whether you're doing something that is an entirely a ribbed garment, and those are becoming very, very popular for fall. A lot of the garments that are coming out have a lot of ribbing to them. So this is a technique I hope works for you as well. Any questions about today's show, you can always reach me at sherrisulkowski@yahoo.com. I'm Sherri Sulkowski, and until next time, I want you to knit on.